Good morning, good evening. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing, we wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you tuning in today, we welcome you in. Something you might not know about Silverlight is I'm passionate about old films. And not necessarily, the Buster Keatons and Abbott and Costello and stuff like that. I'm talking the original films, like stuff that Thomas Edison was personally putting out. The the film of Queen Victoria's funeral. You can still find it on YouTube. It's interesting to watch because when you get back into that time, you will see scenes like, cars weaving in amongst horses and not a traffic light in sight, but nobody getting run over and nobody getting killed. It really is quite interesting. But you can't escape early film without looking at the entertainers of that time. And something that caught my eye recently is Charlie Chaplin. Now, Charlie Chaplin is by no means new to me. I think everybody's familiar with his character, the Little Tramp. And I'm particularly fond of his film, The Great Dictator. People say he doesn't have a very good speaking voice. I find it works very well for the role. Long story short, I started looking into Charlie Chaplin's life. And 1903 is really a very pivotal year for a lot of people. Charlie Chaplin had a difficult life. His father was a drunk later on in life after his parents separated, and his mother kept going in and out of the asylum, forcing Charlie Chaplin into working in a warehouse, basically. Now, working in a warehouse doesn't sound so bad in 2021, but unfortunately, in 1890 and 1903, they used to use the kids to get the jobs that the adults couldn't, and working in a factory would often result in the loss of fingers, because you were expected to pick stuff off the floor while the machine was working over top of you. Obviously, Charlie Chaplin didn't want any part of that life. And at age 14, after his mother's second relapse into illness, and it doesn't really talk about what the illness is, but I'm guessing it's a combination of physical and mental illness, which is very possible. But his mother was also an actress in her own right, and she encouraged young Charlie Chaplin to seek his fortune on the stage. Now, at this point, he's only 14, and he's trying to find something. As a 14-year-old, it's difficult to find work. But Harry Arthur Saintsbury saw his potential. They were originally part of this comedy that's called Jim, A Romance of Cockaigne, which I've been looking into. It's been difficult to find anything about that particular play because it was apparently so bad that it was just, one of those plays that gets lost to history, which is probably for the best. But Harry Arthur Saintsbury was also known for playing Sherlock Holmes, a rather lucrative role, as we know, through the years. Now, here's where things start getting interesting. Charlie Chaplin endeared himself to Harry Arthur Saintsbury, and that when he went back to being Sherlock Holmes, he made sure that Charlie Chaplin was going to have a job alongside him. As a matter of fact, he was so good that he received the princely sum of £2 a week. Now, here in 2021, £2 works out to about $4 a week, and we're thinking, oh my God. But my grandfather, who was a child in the 1920s and 1930s, his mother used to give him a nickel, a 5-cent piece, so he could buy bread for his dinner. And he used to go get the day-old stuff and keep the nickel. So having $4 when you can have dinner for a nickel, hey, Charlie Chaplin was living the high life for a 14-year-old. But this is when I started to look into Harry Arthur Saintsbury. And he was a leading man. He's a relatively handsome gentleman. He was the son of, Frederick Saintsbury, Esquire of the Bank of England. Oh, interesting. The Bank of England. The Bank of England is more than just a bank. It does more than just loan money out. the Bank of England is almost an entity unto itself. Yes, it does fund the crown, it does hold the crown's exchequer, but it really has never lost its influence. And even today, it holds major sway over what goes on. And that's why young Frederick wound up with the ability to pursue whatever life that he wanted. And yeah, his son was able to adopt the role of Sherlock Holmes. He played a whole bunch of things. The Three Musketeers would be notable. I'm just trying to read the ones that you might know about. Now, the peculiar thing is, while Saintsbury took the young Charlie Chaplin under his wing, he was working. Well, no, sorry. He was a member of something called the Green Room Club. Now, the Green Room, for those of you who have never been around actors, is basically where the actors and actresses hang out. And, when they're ready to go off the stage, when they've just come back, it's where they can have, well, in this era, a cigarette and a glass of brandy so they could calm their nerves. The Green Room is not trademarkable because it's so commonly used. What's interesting about him being part of the Green Room Club is that he was part of the Green Room Club in Leicester Square. You might know Leicester Square from the song It's a Long Way to Tipperary. Goodbye, Piccadilly. Hello, Leicester Square, etc. Sorry, I'm not going to torture you by singing any longer. But it's that famous. Now, Leicester Square has an interesting thing because clubs in these days weren't just places that you hung out. You would have to have a membership to them. And in fact, Saintsbury, the mentor of Charlie Chaplin, son of the Bank of England, lived at the Green Room, the club itself. Can you imagine that in the modern day, going into the Lions Club or any other club that you might be a part of and saying, yeah, I'd like to stay here overnight? This is a part of the lifestyle I'm trying to figure out. Yes, it was useful for meeting contacts, and it does continue into World War II. Parliament has their own little, how should I call it? They have their own little social club where they get together for drinks. There's a lot of famous stories about Winston Churchill in the club, but he had a home. Whereas Mr. Saintsbury lived there. And that's literally the entry. And I can't find any record of there actually being rooms in the Green Room. It says that they rented out, I think it's 46 or 42. Hang on. I did take notes. 46 Leicester Square. And that was the first floor. So they took over the first floor, switched into their clubhouse, and it was quite popular for a time. I mean, they had over 1,000 actors, which, well, is fantastic. And the only reason it was closed down is because it got hit by a bomber in 1940 from the Luftwaffe. Another thing to thank the Germans for. No, I'm kidding. Modern Germans are okay. In 1940, they were a little bit nuts, but right now they're okay. But Leicester Square, this club has links all over the place. I mean, Peter Ustinov was once a member, and they they kept to this Leicester Square area, which is a huge arts complex. I mean, going back as far as the 1600s, everything there is theaters, not the person, the place where you go to see people act, ballet recital halls, all sorts of arts establishments. And yet, after the 1940s, this area was left to rot. Remember, Batman takes place where somebody's parents are murdered after coming out of the theater. You got a connection there too, although Batman took place in the United States in Gotham City, nicknamed for New York City. The British had the whole setup there for it. A theater with a scummy place. Now, in the 70s and 80s, they started to do urban renewal and make it nicer, but for years it was left to rot. Leicester Square has so much influence on us. Just with those three people, Charlie Chaplin, Peter Ustinov, and Saintsbury, being the original face of Sherlock Holmes and approved by, oh my goodness, why can't I think of the author of Sherlock Holmes right now? It has been a difficult weekend for me, everybody. I apologize about my little brain freezes here. But Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, why do I forget that name? He was actually in attendance while Saintsbury performed. Can you imagine that? That would be like Ian Fleming coming to watch you play as James Bond. It would be quite the honor. So obviously Saintsbury was a pretty good actor. And they all come out of this same small area of London. And if not, they're driven to go there. Even when it's a dump, when Peter Ustinov is there, it's so bad, it's considered like the worst kind of ghetto that we can imagine in the 21st century. But in his time, it was still worth going there. And even though it was crowded and they opened it up to include non-actors just to get some extra cash in, and it's finally closed down. But you have generations of talent coming through this one small organization. It's kind of like a mini university, except it's a club where you have to pay your money. So, the green room, the place where actors prepare themselves, in more ways than one. Not just, education-wise and by coaching, but by learning and studying and making your connections. I'm still running this one to the ground. It's a very interesting piece of history, but people don't look at that very often. And especially when it's offering rooms for hire, rooms for rent, to the sons of bankers of critical banks. I have to go through the Bank of England at some point in the future, but this is just all interesting knowledge that I've bumbled across in the past little bit. So we know it wouldn't have been cheap to be able to stay there. It would have been somewhat prestigious. It would have cost some money. So you would have had to be relatively successful. And we know Charlie Chaplin was successful. We know Saintsbury was successful. We know everybody was successful. Peter Ustinov was successful. And they all passed through those doors at one time or another. And we know Saintsbury gave the rub to Charlie Chaplin, which means he saw talent in the young boy and decided to mentor him. Now, we can run our conspiracy theory in some very, very disturbing ways, but I'm going to leave it as it is for now. Just some food for thought. If you like this episode of the Silverlight Show, please like, share, and subscribe, and we hope you have a fantastic day.